state racism. Now, 20 years old, the direct provision system is cruel and it's heartless. It deliberately puts asylum seekers into miserable living conditions in order to discourage others from travelling here from outside of Fortress Europe. And it deliberately separates asylum seekers from the rest of Irish society, the better to make it easy to deport people whose applications don't succeed. It is an example, the major example in this country, of state racism. Now, we've had reports in recent days of plans to end direct provision. There are provisions included in the programme for government, but it looks suspiciously like a rebranding of direct provision to me, and I want to ask some questions about that. First of all, programme for government says direct provision will be ended within the lifetime of this government. This government potentially could last for 5 years. I can say very clearly to Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Greens that the people who marched with Black Lives Matter and the asylum seekers who protested in the centres are not prepared to wait 5 years for the dismantling of this system. The programme for government says that the accommodation will now be centred on a not-for-profit approach. The removal of the profiteers is welcome. It's actually a result of the pressure that has come from below. But it is not acceptable to switch from private direct provision centres to publicly owned direct provision centres. In other words, direct provision centres which still provide institutional accommodation to asylum seekers and deny asylum seekers the right to go and seek housing and accommodation themselves within society with all the other rights, including HAP, that other people living in this country would have, and including the right to work. So, is institutional accommodation going to be abolished, or is it not? Seems to me that it is not. And if someone can tell me otherwise, I'd like to hear it. This is an important debate. The programme for government talks about speeding up applications for asylum. If your application is accepted, you have the right to stay. If it's rejected, what happens? Oftentimes, you and your family end up being deported. Deportation is a brutal policy. People being taken into custody and then put on flights and kicked out of the country against their will. So the speeding up of applications, is that going to mean the speeding up of deportations? We've seen nearly 600 deportations in the year 2017, 2018 and 2019 alone. So what the people who've spoken out against direct provision and who've marched want is they want the speedy dismantling of this system. They want the right for asylum seekers to live in the community with the same rights as others in our society, and an end to the racist policy of deportation. And I'm challenging Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Greens to contradict me if I'm wrong, but it looks to me like what's being proposed is that this could take another whole number of years, that institutional accommodation is not to be abolished, and that you will continue with the policy of deportation, including quicker deportations. The question of citizenship rights taken away from people from outside the EU born here after the year 2004, a racist referendum. Some of those young people have since been deported. Now that they're in their teenage years, they're facing discrimination in schools, in work, in study as a result of this. Solidarity People Before Profit TDs brought a bill before the last Dáil saying that citizenship rights should be restored. I am going to resubmit that bill, and I'm going to add to it a provision that young people who grow up in this country should also have the right to citizenship where it is currently denied to them. I had wanted Count Corla to go on and to make important points about anti-traveller racism in this society. The clock is against me now. This is an issue that I will certainly be returning to.
Thank you very much.